Welcome to room 348. Inside, a dead man. The coroner would later rule his organs were crushed and that he'd been murdered, but room 348 was locked from the inside. So, who killed him? How'd he die? I'm John Genoa with a story of how a real-life Sherlock Holmes figured out how a man was murdered, who killed him, and why. It was September 15th, 2010. Gregg Fleniken checked into the MCM Elegante Hotel in Beaumont, Texas. He was kicking back after a long day at work. He was in the oil land leasing business. Earlier that evening, Gregg had been emailing with his wife, Susie, but now he was lying on the bed, smoking a cigarette, watching Iron Man 2. Sadly, he never got to see how it ended. Before it was over, Gregg was struck from nowhere with a blow so incredibly violent it battered his insides. He somehow managed to get up off the bed and move a few feet before collapsing face first on the floor. He was most likely dead before he even hit the ground. The next morning, his wife Susie grew worried. They spoke every morning, but today, nothing. 2 coworkers were sent to the hotel. They got no response when they knocked. The hotel manager had to open the door, and that's where they found Gregg, still holding a spent cigarette between 2 stiff fingers. There was a noticeable wet spot on the crotch of his pajama pants, and the room was quite stuffy and warm. Detective Scott Apple arrived, but couldn't find anything suspicious. There were no signs of a break-in or struggle. Nothing in the room seemed disturbed. There wasn't even any blood or obvious wound. Strangest of all, Gregg's wallet was still in his back pocket with a stack of untouched $100 bills in it. Detective Apple looked through Gregg's bags but didn't find any pills he could have OD'd on, so he figured Gregg may have died from natural causes. After all, his wife Susie confirmed he was a chain smoker. He didn't exercise. He never saw a doctor, but ultimately it would be up to the coroner to determine the cause of death. Dr. Tommy Brown was the Jefferson County medical examiner who examined Gregg's body. Brown found a 55-year-old Caucasian male that was in decent shape. After a methodical inspection, Brown identified a 1-inch abrasion on his left cheek where his face hit the rug. Strangely, he also had a 1/2-inch laceration on his scrotum. Now this was interesting. The sac itself was swollen and discolored. There was a small amount of edema fluid around the wound. The bruising spread up through the groin area and across the right hip. Something hit him, something hard. The story the body told grew more intriguing. Brown opened the front of the torso and discovered a lot of blood and extensive internal damage. A certain amount of partly digested food had been torn from the intestines. The doctor also found small lacerations there on the stomach and the liver. He also found 2 broken ribs and a hole in the right atrium of his heart. These conditions reflected severe trauma. It looked for all the world like Gregg had been beaten to death, or somehow crushed. Brown concluded that the wound to his genitals was likely caused by a hard kick. He'd also taken a blow to the chest so severe it inflicted lethal damage. He would have bled out in less than 30 seconds. On the official form next to manner of death, Brown wrote, "Homicide." The doctor told Detective Apple that the man in room 348 suffered the kind of severe internal injuries he was used to seeing in crash victims, perhaps even someone crushed under a heavy fallen object. But the physical evidence didn't add up. How does a man get beaten so badly his ribs crack, inner organs tear, and heart ruptures, but his torso is fine? Maybe Gregg was beaten to death somewhere else and his body returned to the room? And then what? Carefully placed on the rug? Nothing about the scene added up to a crime. Apple couldn't find any motives. Gregg's wife Susie adored him. His co-workers all liked him. He didn't know anyone at the hotel, so why would someone murder him? After months of investigation, they were left with just 2 theories. The first involved a hotel maintenance man called up to Gregg's room that very night to fix an electrical circuit. Dead end. That went nowhere. The second theory involved a group of union electricians. They were staying next door in room 349. They were in town for an extended stay, and in the evenings they get together in one of their rooms to drink and hang out. Maybe one of these guys did it. Detective Apple questioned them. 2 guys called Lance Mueller and Tim Steinmetz. They said they knew nothing, they heard nothing, and they saw nothing. 3 of the other electricians were also interviewed. They had nothing new to offer. And so that, it would seem, was that. But Gregg's now widow Susie wasn't about to give up so easily. She contacted Ken Brennan, a former Long Island cop and DEA special agent now working as a private investigator. Brennan was like a dog with a bone and began digging deep, leaving no stone unturned. After spending weeks examining every single aspect of the case, he met with co-workers of the electricians who'd been staying in the hotel that night. What if they heard something around the water cooler police had not? The crew foreman told Brennan that he heard something about a gun going off in a boarding house, but that had nothing to do with Gregg's case. Gregg's case was about a fight in a hotel, but that little suggestion seemed to stick with Brennan. He and Detective Apple returned to room 348 to look for a potential bullet hole. They were about to give up their search when Brennan noticed an indentation in the wall alongside a closed door which led to an adjoining room. The indentation turned out to be a repair job. Brennan suggested looking on the other side. Hotel security let them into room 349. There, they found a small hole in the wall patched with some filler. Filler later identified as dried toothpaste. A bullet passed through the wall. The small, neat hole in 349 marked its entry, the larger hole in 348 its exit. They carefully excavated both holes and took laser measurements. The bullet's trajectory pointed straight up to the bed where Gregg had been watching his movie. But to convict the electricians for Gregg's murder, they needed the original medical examiner to reverse his findings. Remember Dr. Brown? Well, he didn't believe them. He'd gone through the dead man's organs himself and found no bullet wound, so that was pretty much that. Making matters worse, the body had also been cremated. They couldn't go and re-exhume it. So Brennan turned to the autopsy photos, and that's where he found what he was looking for. The bullet entered Gregg's scrotum and tore him up from the insides. It wasn't visible because of the folds. All the internal injuries then traced the bullet's fatal trajectory. But where did it end up? They looked at the photo of the heart, and there it was, a bullet hole. Steinmetz, the electrician who'd been staying in room 349, was re-interviewed. After an hour or two of questioning, Steinmetz broke down and admitted to making a false police report. Then, finally, he revealed the truth about what happened that night. They'd been drinking beer. Mueller asked a third coworker who was hanging out with them, a guy called Danny Pisano, to fetch a bottle of whiskey from Mueller's car. That and his pistol, a 9mm Ruger. When Pisano returned, Mueller took the gun and started showing off with it. First, he pointed it at Steinmetz, then in Pisano's direction, when bang! It went off. Pisano thought he'd been hit, but turned around to see a hole in the wall behind him. Freaked out, Mueller bundled up the gun and took it back to his car. When he returned, he found Pisano had already left. Mueller and Steinmetz went downstairs to the bar and tried to put the incident out of their minds. 8 months after Gregg Fleniken was fatally shot, his killer was about to be brought before the judge. Mueller entered a no-contest plea to manslaughter. The judge began by saying the whole tragedy might be seen as just a terrible accident, but he couldn't ignore the long list of willfully irresponsible choices that followed. So Mueller got 10 years. There was his criminally irresponsible decision to get drunk and fool around with a loaded gun. He patched the hole with toothpaste to conceal his crime. He hid the gun immediately in his car, then stashed it with a friend for the first few days after the incident. Later, he gave it to an attorney for safekeeping. Had he come forward at any time prior to the solving of this mystery, it's unlikely he'd have been charged with manslaughter, much less gone to jail. But Mueller gambled from the start that whatever connection he had to Gregg's death would never be discovered. He was wrong. If you have any thoughts or comments, please leave them below, and if you enjoyed this episode, please like and subscribe. I'm John Genoa, and I'll be back with another episode of America's Strangest History soon. For more on what happened in room 348 that night, head to our America's Strangest History channel on YouTube.